The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens, but Catherine barely noticed the golden light streaming through her bedroom windows. She sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection while her lady-in-waiting carefully arranged her hair for the day's engagements. The face looking back at her seemed like a stranger's, pale, tired, with eyes that held secrets too heavy for someone so young. It had been 3 months since the miscarriage. 3 months since she had lost the baby she and William had hoped would be their third child. The doctors had been kind but clinical, explaining that these things happened, that she shouldn't blame herself. The palace had released a carefully worded statement about the Princess of Wales taking time for personal matters, and the world had moved on, as it always did. But Catherine hadn't moved on. How could she, when every morning she woke up expecting to feel the familiar flutter of life within her, only to remember that emptiness had taken its place? She had become an expert at hiding her pain, smiling for cameras, attending functions, playing the role of the perfect royal wife and mother. Yet inside, she felt like she was drowning in an ocean of grief that no one else could see. William tried to understand. She knew he did. He would hold her at night when he thought she was sleeping, his own tears dampening her hair. He had canceled several engagements in those first weeks, staying close to home, bringing her tea in the mornings, reading to Charlotte and George when Catherine couldn't find the strength to do their bedtime stories. But even he couldn't reach the depths of her sorrow. The loss had changed everything between them, creating an invisible wall that neither knew how to cross. They were gentle with each other, speaking in hushed tones, avoiding any mention of the future they had planned. The nursery they had begun preparing remained untouched, its door permanently closed. Catherine had walked past it once, her hand trembling on the handle, but she couldn't bring herself to go inside. Today was particularly difficult because it was the anniversary of George's birth. 4 years ago, she had been so happy, so full of hope for their growing family. Now celebrating felt like a betrayal of the child who would never have birthdays. She knew she had to pull herself together for George's sake, had to find a way to smile and sing happy birthday and pretend that her heart wasn't breaking. Her phone buzzed with messages from well-meaning friends and family. Her mother had called twice already, offering to help with the party preparations. Pippa had sent flowers with a note that simply said, "Thinking of you today." Even Harry had reached out from California, his message brief but caring. Everyone was trying to help in their own way, but none of them understood that their kindness only made her feel more isolated in her grief. The children had been staying with their grandparents for the past week, giving Catherine time to prepare for the celebration. She missed them terribly, especially Charlotte's innocent chatter and George's infectious laughter. They knew something was wrong with Mummy. Children always did. But they were too young to understand the weight of loss, too innocent to comprehend why their mother sometimes disappeared into herself for hours at a time. As her lady-in-waiting finished with her hair, Catherine forced herself to stand and move toward her wardrobe. She selected a cheerful yellow dress, knowing that the photographers would analyze every detail of her appearance. Yellow was hopeful, optimistic, everything she wasn't feeling but needed to project. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had become so skilled at wearing masks that sometimes she forgot what her real face looked like underneath. The morning stretched ahead of her like an obstacle course. First, there would be the private family celebration at Kensington Palace, where she would need to be present and engaged for George's sake. Then, later in the afternoon, there was a scheduled appearance at a children's hospital, an engagement she had committed to months ago, before everything changed. The thought of being around sick children, of seeing the fear in parents' eyes, made her stomach twist with anxiety. She had considered canceling the hospital visit, but William had gently encouraged her to keep the commitment. He believed, as did her therapist, that returning to her royal duties would help her heal. Catherine wasn't so sure. Sometimes she felt like she was performing her own life, going through the motions while her real self remained hidden away, too fragile to face the world. The palace had been unusually quiet these past months. The staff moved around her with careful deference, speaking in whispers, avoiding any mention of babies or pregnancy. Even the gardeners seemed to tread more softly outside her windows. Everyone was trying to protect her, but their consideration only served as a constant reminder of what she had lost. Catherine walked to her sitting room, where William was already dressed and reading through his briefing notes for the day. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the familiar flash of concern cross his features before he quickly masked it with a smile. They had both become so good at pretending, she thought sadly, even with each other. He stood and came to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two people who loved each other deeply but were struggling to find their way back to the light. Catherine wanted to tell him everything, how scared she was that she might never feel whole again, how guilty she felt for not being the mother George and Charlotte deserved, how sometimes she lay awake at night wondering if she would ever be strong enough to try for another child. But the words wouldn't come. They never did anymore. Instead, she leaned into his embrace, letting herself be held for just a moment before the day's demands pulled them apart again. In his arms, she could almost remember who she used to be, the woman who laughed easily, who faced challenges with courage, who believed that love could conquer anything. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would try to find that woman again, but today she just needed to survive George's birthday and remember how to be a mother to the children who were still here, still needing her, still believing that their mummy could fix anything with a kiss and a smile. The sound of children's laughter echoed through Kensington Palace as George and Charlotte burst through the front doors, their faces bright with excitement from their week at Grandmama's house. Catherine's heart lifted slightly at the sight of them, the first genuine emotion she had felt all morning. George ran straight to her, his 4-year-old arms wrapping around her legs with the fierce devotion that only children possessed. "Mummy, we made you a present," he announced, pulling back to look at her with eyes that were so much like William's. "It's a surprise for my birthday because birthdays are for sharing," Grandmama said. Charlotte, now walking steadily on her chubby toddler legs, toddled over with her arms outstretched. "Mama, up!" she demanded with the imperious tone of a true princess. Catherine scooped her up, burying her face in Charlotte's soft hair and breathing in that sweet baby smell that always made her heart ache with both love and loss. William appeared behind the children, carrying their overnight bags and wearing the first relaxed smile Catherine had seen from him in weeks. Watching him with their children always reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. He was such a natural father, patient and playful in ways that often surprised people who only knew his public persona. The morning passed in a blur of birthday preparations. Catherine found herself genuinely engaged for the first time in months as she helped George unwrap his presents and marveled at Charlotte's attempts to help her brother with his new toys. The children's joy was infectious, and for brief moments, Catherine forgot about the weight she carried in her chest. But then George would make an innocent comment about when the new baby would come to play with them, or Charlotte would toddle toward the closed nursery door, and the familiar wave of grief would crash over Catherine again. She had become expert at hiding these moments, quickly redirecting the children's attention, or excusing herself for a few minutes to compose herself in private. The family photographer had been scheduled to take official birthday portraits, and Catherine steeled herself for the session. She knew these photos would be scrutinized by millions of people around the world, analyzed for signs of strain or unhappiness. The photographer, a kind woman who had worked with the family for years, seemed to sense Catherine's fragile state and kept the session brief and informal. As they posed together on the garden steps, William's hand found hers, squeezing gently. In that moment, with their children giggling between them and the camera capturing what looked like a perfect family moment, Catherine felt the full weight of everything that was missing. There should have been another child in this photo, another little one to complete their family circle. After lunch, while George napped and Charlotte played quietly with her blocks, Catherine retreated to her study to prepare for the afternoon's hospital visit. The briefing note sat unopened on her desk as she stared out the window at the gardens where she and William had walked so many times, planning their future, dreaming about their children. She remembered the day they had found out about the pregnancy that ended in loss. William had been away on a royal tour, and she had called him immediately, barely able to contain her excitement. His joy had been so pure, so complete, that thinking about it now made her throat tight with unshed tears. They had made plans during that phone call, about telling the children, about when to make the announcement, about all the wonderful chaos another baby would bring to their lives. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. William entered, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the careful expression he had perfected over the past months. He set her cup down gently, and settled into the chair across from her desk. "Are you ready for this afternoon?" he asked quietly, and Catherine knew he wasn't just asking about the hospital visit. He was asking if she was ready to face the world again, to be Princess Catherine in public when she was barely holding herself together in private. "I have to be," she replied, the words automatic. It was the same answer she had given to every question lately. She had to be strong for George and Charlotte. She had to be present for her royal duties. She had to be the wife William deserved. She had to be so many things to so many people that she sometimes forgot what she wanted to be for herself. William leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Catherine. The hospital will understand if we need to postpone." But Catherine shook her head. Canceling would only draw more attention, more speculation about her health and her state of mind. The press had been remarkably restrained so far, but she knew their patience wouldn't last forever. Better to make the appearance, smile for the cameras, and get through another day. They drove to the hospital in comfortable silence, Catherine's hand resting in William's as London passed by their window. She watched families walking together, mothers pushing prams, children playing in parks, and felt that familiar sense of being on the outside, looking in at a life she couldn't quite reach anymore. The hospital staff greeted them with warm professionalism, and Catherine slipped into her public role with practiced ease. She toured the pediatric ward, spoke with doctors about new treatment programs, and spent time with young patients who were battling illnesses far more serious than her own invisible wounds. It was in the cancer ward that she met Emma, a 7-year-old girl with bright eyes and a bald head covered by a colorful scarf. Emma was coloring at a small table, her concentration absolute as she worked on what appeared to be a rainbow. "That's beautiful," Catherine said, sitting down beside her. "May I see?" Emma looked up with a shy smile. "It's for my mummy. She's been sad because I'm sick, but I want to show her that even when things are hard, there are still pretty colors." The simple wisdom of the child's words hit Catherine like a physical blow. Here was this little girl, facing something far more frightening than anything Catherine had endured, and she was trying to comfort her mother. The strength and resilience children possessed never ceased to amaze her. They talked for several more minutes, Emma chattering about her love of art and her dreams of becoming a teacher when she grew up. As Catherine prepared to leave, Emma suddenly reached out and took her hand. "You look sad too," Emma said with the directness that only children could manage. "But you're still pretty like the rainbow. Sometimes the best rainbows come after the biggest storms." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes as she thanked Emma and promised to visit again soon. As they walked back through the hospital corridors, William's presence steady beside her, Catherine found herself thinking about Emma's words. Maybe there was truth in them. Maybe healing didn't mean forgetting or pretending the pain didn't exist. Maybe it meant learning to see beauty alongside sorrow, hope alongside grief. The day was far from over, and Catherine knew there would be many more difficult days ahead. But for the first time in months, she felt a tiny spark of something that might eventually grow into hope. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in the palace atmosphere. Catherine began accepting more engagements, each appearance carefully chosen to ease her back into public life. William watched her closely during these events, noting how she seemed to draw strength from the people she met, especially the children and families facing their own challenges. It was during a visit to a grief counseling center that Catherine met Sarah, a mother who had lost her infant son to sudden illness. Sarah was volunteering at the center, helping other bereaved parents navigate their darkest hours. When she and Catherine were introduced, there was an immediate recognition between them, the kind that only came from shared pain. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah said with a gentle smile. "I know we've never met, but I feel like I know you. The way you've carried yourself these past months. Those of us who have walked this path, we see it." Catherine felt something inside her chest loosen at Sarah's words. For so long she had felt isolated in her grief, surrounded by well-meaning people who couldn't truly understand what she was experiencing. Here was someone who did understand, who had survived the unsurvivable and found a way to help others do the same. They talked for nearly an hour, far longer than the official schedule allowed. Sarah shared her own story, the devastating loss, the months of feeling like she was drowning, the slow journey back to something resembling normalcy. She spoke about the guilt of laughing again, the fear that healing meant forgetting, the complicated process of learning to honor her lost child while still living for her surviving family. The hardest part, Sarah said, was accepting that I would never be the same person I was before. I kept trying to get back to who I used to be, but that person didn't exist anymore. Once I stopped fighting that change and started working with it instead, everything became a little easier. Catherine found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone, not even William. She spoke about the closed nursery door, about the panic that seized her when people mentioned babies, about the crushing weight of public appearances when all she wanted to do was hide away from the world. The public role makes it harder, Sarah acknowledged. You're not allowed to grieve messily or publicly. But grief isn't neat, Your Royal Highness. It doesn't follow protocols or timelines. You have to find ways to honor your pain privately, even while maintaining your public duties. When they finally parted, Sarah pressed a small card into Catherine's hand. My number, she explained, for the difficult days. And there will still be difficult days, but they become fewer and farther apart. That evening, Catherine found herself standing outside the closed nursery for the first time in months. The door seemed to loom larger than it actually was, holding behind it all the dreams and hopes that had been shattered. William found her there leaning against the wall with tears streaming down her face. I can't go in, she whispered. I thought I was getting stronger, but I can't even open a door. William moved to stand beside her, not reaching for the door handle, not pushing her to do anything she wasn't ready for. You don't have to go in today, he said simply. Or tomorrow, or next week. You go in when you're ready, not because anyone else thinks you should be. They stood there together in the quiet hallway, and Catherine felt the weight of expectation, her own expectations, as much as anyone else's, begin to lift slightly. Maybe healing really didn't have a timeline. Maybe it was okay to take as long as she needed. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Harry and Meghan had flown in from California, ostensibly for a charity event, but really Catherine knew to see her. The four of them had grown distant over the past year, pulled apart by family tensions and different life choices, but grief had a way of stripping away everything that wasn't essential. Meghan found Catherine in the garden, tending to the roses that had always been her refuge. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Meghan following Catherine's lead in deadheading the spent blooms and checking for signs of disease. I lost a baby too, Meghan said quietly, her words barely audible above the sound of the gardening shears. Last year before we moved to California. I never spoke about it publicly, but the loss, it changes you. Catherine's hand stilled on the rose stem she was examining. She had suspected from certain comments Meghan had made, from the way she sometimes looked when children were mentioned, but they had never spoken about it directly. How do you carry it? Catherine asked. The sadness, the guilt, the fear that it might happen again? Carefully, Meghan replied, like carrying water in cupped hands. Some days you lose some, and that's okay. Some days your hands are steadier than others. The important thing is not to blame yourself when you spill a little. They talked until lunch, sharing stories and fears that neither had felt safe expressing elsewhere. Meghan spoke about the pressure of public life during private grief, about the impossible balance between duty and healing. Catherine found herself laughing for the first time in weeks when Meghan shared a story about Archie's reaction to seeing his mother cry. He brought me his favorite toy car and said, Mama sad, but car makes vroom vroom happy, Meghan said, mimicking her son's serious expression. Children have such pure wisdom sometimes. The afternoon brought a family gathering that felt more natural than any they had shared in months. Harry and William played with George and Charlotte in the garden, while Catherine and Meghan prepared tea. The distance between the brothers seemed smaller somehow, grief having reminded them what really mattered. As evening approached and Harry and Meghan prepared to leave, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of connection, of being understood without having to explain herself. The loss would always be with her, but perhaps it didn't have to isolate her. That night, as she tucked George into bed, he looked up at her with those serious blue eyes that reminded her so much of William. Mummy, are you getting better? He asked with the directness that children possessed. Catherine considered her answer carefully. She could give him the easy reassurance that adults usually offered children, but something about his earnest expression made her want to be honest. I'm learning how to carry my sadness better, she said finally, like learning to carry something heavy. At first your arms hurt, but gradually they get stronger. George nodded solemnly. Like when I learned to carry Charlotte. At first she was too heavy, but now I can carry her for a long time. Exactly like that, Catherine said, kissing his forehead. You're very wise for 4 years old. As she turned off his bedroom light, Catherine reflected on the day's conversations. Sarah's words about accepting change, Megan's metaphor about carrying water, George's simple understanding of growing stronger. All of it was helping her see her grief differently. Not as something to overcome or fix, but as something to carry with more grace. The path forward still seemed uncertain, but for the first time in months, Catherine felt like she might actually be moving forward rather than just surviving each day. The nursery door remained closed, but she no longer saw it as a symbol of her failure. It was simply a door that she would open when she was ready, and not a moment before. Autumn arrived early that year, painting the palace gardens in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Catherine of the beauty that could emerge from endings. She had begun walking the grounds each morning, a ritual that helped center her before facing the day's responsibilities. William often joined her when his schedule allowed, their conversations growing deeper and more honest with each passing week. It was during one of these morning walks that Catherine finally spoke the words that had been locked inside her. "Heart, for months, I'm afraid to try again," she said suddenly, stopping beside the fountain where they had posed for so many family photos. "I'm afraid that if we have another baby and something happens, I won't survive it." William turned to face her, his expression gentle but serious. They had danced around this topic for weeks, both knowing it needed to be addressed but neither quite ready to voice their fears. "I'm afraid too," he admitted, "not just of losing another baby, but of losing you in the process. These past months, watching you struggle, feeling helpless to ease your pain, it's been the hardest thing I've ever experienced." They sat on the fountain's edge, surrounded by the morning mist and the quiet sounds of the palace waking up. For the first time since the miscarriage, they were able to talk openly about their shared trauma, their different ways of processing grief, and their fears about the future. "I keep thinking about all the children who might never exist because I'm too scared to risk it again," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But then I think about the possibility of going through this pain again, and I don't know if I'm strong enough." William took her hand, intertwining their fingers in the familiar gesture that had comforted them both through so many challenges over the years. "We don't have to decide anything right now," he said. "We don't have to know what our family will look like in a year or 5 years. We just have to take care of each other and George and Charlotte today." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. The careful distance they had maintained began to close as they started sharing their feelings more openly. They began attending grief counseling together, something Catherine had initially resisted but now found helpful. Having a neutral space to process their emotions was healing for both of them. Dr. Matthews, their counselor, helped them understand that their different grieving styles didn't mean they loved their lost baby any less. William's tendency to focus on practical matters and future plans wasn't emotional avoidance. It was his way of honoring their loss by ensuring their family remained strong. Catherine's need to sit with her sadness wasn't weakness. It was her way of fully processing the magnitude of what they had lost. "Grief isn't something you graduate from," Dr. Matthews explained during one session. "It's something you learn to carry. And the goal isn't to carry it identically. It's to support each other as you each carry it in your own way." Meanwhile, Catherine's public duties had taken on new meaning. She found herself drawn to causes related to maternal and infant health, mental health support for new mothers, and grief counseling services. Her staff noticed a new depth to her engagements, a genuine connection with the people she met that went beyond royal protocol. During a visit to a birthing center, Catherine met Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an obstetrician who specialized in high-risk pregnancies and pregnancy loss. Dr. Rodriguez had seen Catherine's name on the visitor list and made a point of speaking with her privately. "Your Royal Highness," she said, "I hope you don't mind my directness, but I wanted you to know that many women who experience pregnancy loss go on to have healthy pregnancies. The fear is natural and valid, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story." Catherine felt her cheeks flush. She hadn't realized her personal situation was so apparent to medical professionals, but Dr. Rodriguez's kind eyes held no judgment, only understanding. "How do they find the courage?" Catherine asked. "How do they risk their hearts again?" "Different ways," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "Some need medical interventions to feel safer. Some need therapy to process their fears. Some need time, sometimes years, before they're ready. And some decide their families are complete as they are. And that's valid too. There's no right answer, only what's right for each individual family. They talked for another 20 minutes. Dr. Rodriguez sharing statistics that were both sobering and hopeful, treatment options that hadn't existed even a few years ago, and support systems that could help families navigate high-risk pregnancies with better outcomes. That evening, Catherine shared the conversation with William over dinner. George and Charlotte had been put to bed, and they sat in the quiet intimacy of their private dining room, talking in the honest way they had rediscovered. She said something interesting, Catherine said, pushing food around her plate. She said that healing doesn't always mean returning to exactly who you were before. Sometimes it means becoming someone new, someone who carries wisdom along with scars. William nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that too. We're not the same people who lost that baby 6 months ago. We've learned things about ourselves, about each other, about what really matters. Maybe that's not something to regret. As the weeks passed, Catherine found herself sleeping better, laughing more readily at George's silly jokes, and feeling genuinely present during Charlotte's bedtime stories. The deep sadness hadn't disappeared, but it no longer consumed all her energy. She had learned to carry it alongside joy, hope, and love rather than letting it crowd everything else out. The transformation was noticeable to everyone around them. Palace staff commented on the return of laughter to the private quarters. Friends remarked on the renewed connection between Catherine and William at public events. Most importantly, George and Charlotte seemed to sense that their mother was finding her way back to them. One evening, as Catherine was reviewing her schedule for the following week, she realized she was looking forward to her engagements rather than simply enduring them. A visit to a children's hospice, a speech at a mental health awareness event, a garden party for military families. Each represented an opportunity to connect with people, to offer whatever comfort or support she could. The person she was becoming wasn't the same as who she had been before the loss, but perhaps that was okay. This new version of herself understood pain in ways the old Catherine hadn't. She could sit with grieving mothers without feeling the need to fix their sadness or rush them toward healing. She could acknowledge that some questions didn't have easy answers, that some wounds left permanent scars, and that this was part of the human experience rather than something to be ashamed of. Late that night, as she prepared for bed, Catherine caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her still carried sadness in her eyes, but there was something else there too. A quiet strength that hadn't existed before, a depth that came from having descended to her darkest places and found her way back to the light. She thought about Emma, the little girl from the hospital who had spoken about rainbows after storms. Maybe the child had been right. Maybe the most beautiful rainbows really did come after the biggest storms, when the light had to fight its way through the darkness to create something magnificent. Winter came gently that year, with soft snows that blanketed the palace grounds in pristine white. Catherine stood at her bedroom window on a quiet December morning, watching George and Charlotte build a snowman in the garden below. Their laughter carried up through the crisp air, filling her heart with the kind of simple joy she had almost forgotten how to feel. Today marked 8 months since the miscarriage, and for the first time, Catherine realized she had woken up thinking about her living children rather than the one she had lost. The grief was still there, she suspected it always would be, but it no longer dominated every moment of her day. William appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as they watched their children play. This simple gesture, once so natural between them, had taken months to feel comfortable again. They had both been afraid to reach for each other, worried that their own pain might somehow increase their partner's suffering. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said softly, using the phrase that had become their shorthand for checking in on each other's emotional state. "I was thinking about how different this December feels from last December," Catherine replied, leaning back against his chest. "Last year we were so excited about the pregnancy, making plans, imagining what Christmas would be like with 3 children. I thought this December would be all about what we lost, but instead, it feels like it's about what we found." They had indeed found things in the darkness of their grief, a deeper understanding of each other, a stronger appreciation for the children they had, a renewed commitment to being present in their own lives rather than always rushing toward the next milestone or achievement. The past month had brought several meaningful developments. Catherine had begun working with a charity that supported families experiencing pregnancy loss, using her position to bring attention to resources that might help other couples navigate similar traumas. She had written a deeply personal letter that was published in several parenting magazines, sharing her experience without revealing private details, offering hope to women who felt alone in their grief. The response had been overwhelming. Hundreds of letters arrived at the palace from women sharing their own stories, thanking Catherine for her honesty, expressing relief that someone in such a visible position had acknowledged that pregnancy loss was both common and devastating. Catherine read every letter, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, always grateful for the connections formed through shared experience. "Your Royal Highness," one letter had read, "I lost my baby at 20 weeks, and for months I felt like I was the only person in the world this had happened to. Seeing you continue your royal duties while grieving helped me understand that I could honor my loss while still living my life. Thank you for showing us that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry love and loss together." William had been equally moved by the response to Catherine's letter. He had watched her transform her private pain into public purpose, and while he worried about the emotional toll of engaging so deeply with other people's grief, he also saw how much strength she drew from helping others. The nursery door had finally been opened 3 weeks ago. Catherine had done it alone on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the children were napping and William was in meetings. She had stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the pale yellow walls they had chosen, the rocking chair where she had planned to nurse, the mobile that would never spin above a sleeping baby. Instead of the crushing sadness she had expected, Catherine felt something closer to peace. This room had held so much hope, so much love, and that love didn't disappear just because their plans had changed. She had spent an hour in there sitting in the rocking chair, allowing herself to remember the joy of planning for their third child, without being overwhelmed by the pain of losing that future. When William came home that evening, he found her in the kitchen making dinner as if nothing unusual had happened. It wasn't until he noticed the nursery door standing open that he realized what she had done. "How was it?" he asked simply. "Sad," Catherine replied honestly, "but not devastating. I think I was more afraid of the door than what was behind it." They had decided together to transform the room into a family library, a place where they could read with George and Charlotte, where the love they had felt for their lost baby could live alongside the love they shared with their living children. It felt like the right way to honor all the dreams that room had held. Christmas preparations were different this year, too. Catherine found herself more engaged in the traditions, more present with the children as they decorated the tree and wrapped presents. She had worried that the holidays would be difficult, filled with reminders of the Christmas they had planned to celebrate while pregnant. But instead, she felt grateful for the family they had, the traditions they were creating, the love that surrounded them despite their losses. George had become quite the little helper, carefully placing ornaments on the lower branches of the tree while Charlotte toddled around, occasionally grabbing decorations and requiring gentle redirection. Watching them together, Catherine was struck by how resilient children were, how they had navigated their mother's difficult months with an intuitive understanding that went beyond their years. "Mummy," George said, as they hung stockings by the fireplace, "will the baby that went to heaven get presents too?" The question caught Catherine off guard, but she found she could answer it without the sharp pain that such topics used to bring. "I think babies in heaven have everything they need," she said, lifting him up so he could reach the mantel. "But it's nice that you think about that baby with love." "I do think about the baby with love," George said seriously. "Daddy said love doesn't stop just because someone goes away." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different tears than she had cried before, tears of gratitude rather than despair. William had found the perfect way to help their son understand loss without fear, love without possessiveness. That evening, after the children were in bed, Catherine and William sat by the fire, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about their plans for the new year. For the first time in months, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Rodriguez said," Catherine said, curled up beside William on the sofa, "about how healing sometimes means becoming someone new rather than returning to who you were before." William nodded, his arm tightening around her. "You have changed," he said. "You're quieter in some ways, more thoughtful. But you're also braver, more honest, more willing to sit with difficult emotions instead of running from them." "We both have," Catherine replied. "This experience broke us apart in some ways, but it also broke us open. I feel like I understand you better now, understand myself better. I wouldn't wish this pain on anyone, but I can't bring myself to regret everything it's taught us." As they sat together in the flickering firelight, surrounded by the evidence of their family's love, photos of George and Charlotte, handmade decorations, books they read together, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in almost a year. She felt complete, not because their family was necessarily finished growing, not because the pain of loss had disappeared, but because she had learned to find wholeness even in the midst of incompleteness. The woman she had become could hold joy and sorrow simultaneously, could love deeply while accepting that love sometimes involved loss, could find meaning in helping others navigate their own darkness. This version of herself was harder won than the innocent happiness of her earlier years, but it was also more durable, more authentic, more capable of weathering whatever storms might come. Spring arrived with unusual fanfare that year, as if nature itself was celebrating renewal and new beginnings. Catherine stood in the garden that had become her sanctuary, watching as the first daffodils pushed through the soil in the same spot where she had planted them the previous autumn. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, beauty emerging from the dark earth, life insisting on returning even after the harshest winter. It had been exactly 1 year since the miscarriage, a date that had loomed in Catherine's mind for weeks. She had wondered how it would feel to reach this milestone, whether it would bring fresh grief or a sense of closure. Instead, she found herself feeling something unexpected: gratitude. Not gratitude for the loss itself. That pain would always be sacred, always deserve its place in her heart. But gratitude for the journey that loss had taken her on, for the depths of herself she had discovered, for the stronger marriage she and William had built from the pieces of their broken hearts. The past few months had brought developments that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Catherine had launched a foundation focused on supporting families through pregnancy loss and infant death, working closely with medical professionals and bereaved parents to create resources that addressed both the practical and emotional needs of grieving families. The work was challenging, often emotionally draining, but it filled a purpose in Catherine's life that she hadn't known she was missing. Her own experience with loss had given her a unique ability to connect with families in crisis, to offer comfort without empty platitudes, to sit in the darkness with people who needed to know they weren't alone. William had been her partner in this endeavor, as he was in everything else. His own journey through grief had been different but no less transformative. He had learned to speak more openly about emotional pain, to offer support without trying to fix everything, to honor their lost child while fully embracing the family they had. Together, they had visited dozens of hospitals, met with countless families, and slowly begun to change the conversation around pregnancy loss from something whispered about in shame to something that could be acknowledged and supported openly. On this anniversary morning, they had planned a private ceremony in the garden, just the two of them and a small memorial they had created for their lost baby. It wasn't marked with a headstone or plaque, but with a rose bush they had planted together, its deep red blooms a symbol of love that transcended physical presence. As they stood beside the rose bush, Catherine felt William take her hand. They had both changed so much in the past year, their faces marked by grief and wisdom, their relationship deepened by shared struggle, their understanding of love expanded to include loss as well as joy. "I think about who we were a year ago," William said softly, "and sometimes I can barely recognize those people. We thought we understood what it meant to love completely, to be a family, to face challenges together. We had no idea how much deeper all of those things could go." Catherine nodded, remembering the couple who had received the devastating news in the doctor's office 12 months ago. They had been so focused on the future, on building their family, on checking milestones off their list. Now she understood that love wasn't about the destinations you reached together, but about how you traveled the journey, especially the parts of the road you never expected to walk. "I used to think that protecting our children meant shielding them from sadness," Catherine said. "Now I realize it means teaching them that sadness is part of life, that it's possible to carry grief and joy at the same time, that love is strong enough to survive loss. George and Charlotte had indeed learned these lessons, though in the gentle, age-appropriate way that children needed. They knew they had a brother or sister in heaven, someone they would never meet but who was part of their family story. They had seen their parents sad and had learned that sadness wasn't something to fear or fix, but something that could coexist with love and laughter. The memorial ceremony was simple, but profound. They each shared a memory or thought about their lost baby, read a poem Catherine had written during her darkest days, and sat in comfortable silence as the morning sun warmed their faces. It wasn't about moving on or letting go. It was about integrating this love and loss into the full story of their family. Later that afternoon, Catherine received a call that would mark another kind of beginning. Dr. Rodriguez, the obstetrician she had met during her hospital visits, called with news about a research study Catherine's foundation had helped fund. The study had led to a breakthrough in understanding certain types of pregnancy loss, potentially preventing similar losses for thousands of future families. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Rodriguez said, "I wanted you to be the first to know. The research your foundation supported has led to a treatment protocol that could reduce pregnancy loss by up to 30% in high-risk cases. Your baby's legacy is going to save lives." Catherine hung up the phone with tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in a year, they were tears of pure joy. Their lost child would never be forgotten, would never be replaced. But their brief existence had somehow contributed to preventing other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. That evening, as they tucked George and Charlotte into bed, Catherine felt a completeness she had never expected to find again. Not the naive completeness of someone who had never experienced loss, but the deeper wholeness of someone who had been broken and had chosen to heal in a way that honored both the pain and the love. "Mummy," Charlotte said, as Catherine kissed her goodnight, "you smell like flowers." "I was in the garden today," Catherine explained, smoothing her daughter's hair. "The garden where our baby's Rose lives?" George asked from his bed across the room. "Yes, that garden," Catherine said, struck by how naturally her children spoke about their lost sibling. "I like that the baby has a rose," Charlotte said sleepily. "Roses are pretty and they smell nice and they come back every year." As Catherine turned off their bedroom light, she was overwhelmed by the wisdom of children, their ability to find beauty and continuity, even in concepts as difficult as death and loss. Charlotte was right. Roses did come back every year, reliable in their renewal, beautiful in their persistence. Walking downstairs to join William in their sitting room, Catherine reflected on the year that had changed everything. They had lost a baby, but they had gained so much else. Deeper empathy, stronger faith in their love, a more authentic way of living, and the ability to help other families navigate their own dark times. The future remained uncertain, as it always had. They might try for another baby someday, or they might decide their family was complete with George and Charlotte. Either choice would be okay, made not from fear but from a place of wisdom and acceptance. What Catherine knew for certain was that they would face whatever came next together, with the kind of love that had been tested by loss and had emerged not diminished but transformed. The woman who had broken down in the doctor's office a year ago had been remade into someone stronger, someone who understood that the most beautiful lives weren't the ones free from sorrow, but the ones that had learned to alchemize pain into purpose, grief into grace. As she settled beside William on the sofa, his arm automatically encircling her, Catherine looked around their home, at the photos of their children, at the books they read together, at the flowers she had brought in from the garden, and felt a profound sense of peace. Their story had been written in joy and sorrow, in hope and loss, in the kind of love that endured because it had been tested and proven unbreakable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to help other families find their way through darkness toward light. But tonight, Catherine was content to sit with the man she loved, grateful for the journey that had brought them to this deeper understanding of what it meant to love completely, live authentically, and find meaning even in the midst of loss.